Folks, thanks for joining. We are going to be talking about the interaction category for the Core77 awards, and we're very excited to do so. I'm Nick Delamere. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves as well really quickly with your names?
Sure. Go ahead, Sara. Who are you?
I am Sara Gooch. Some of you also may know me as Sarah Louise Todd from my previous, but I am a design consultant here in San Francisco.
Great. I'm Aric Cheston. No previous aliases. I am the Assistant Vice President for Design for AT&T.
It's not like the assistant to the vice president, though, right?
No. I did accidentally change my LinkedIn profile to Assistant to the President. I decided to leave it for a couple of days just to see what would happen.
That's fantastic. And I'm responsible for North America for Fjord, a part of Accenture Interactive, and based also in San Francisco. So what we're going to talk about today, again, is sort of the interaction design category, the runners-up and the winners for this category. There were a number of different entries. One of the things that we first noticed immediately was sort of the apples and oranges of it all. I mean, interaction design, as we all know, is a really broad topic at this point, and any number of sort of different things were sent in, and all of them sort of, wonderful in their own ways. We noticed that sort of early on and immediately realized that we had to create sort of some level of kind of consideration set or some way of actually sort of equalizing all of the things that we had. And it really became very simple. The first one was sort of what strikes our fancy? What are the things that are really standing out, regardless of the stories that they're trying to tell? What are some things that are particularly well depicted, feel well thought out, or there's a level of craft and sort of that's brought through in those things. The other was sort of looking across at sort of a mixture of what we might consider sort of whimsy and playfulness, as well as sort of utility or usability. And we saw this a lot in the pro category, where there was definitely a broad mix of some products and services that interactions that were really very much more on sort of the playful side. It was hard to sort of, in a sense, sort of estimate their value beyond that. And other things that were very much pragmatic and sort of and driven towards that. And so we noticed that a lot on the pro side, on the student side. I mean, everything felt, these were passion projects, and we'll talk about them that way. And you could feel the sort of the emotion coming through on those things. Another thing that we looked at was this notion of community. We are, I think, collectively, sort of as an industry, we're realizing more and more that sort of design for just an individual or sort of creating for an N of one isn't necessarily sufficient. So we were really looking for ideas that brought people together, or sort of brought people into their environments more, or sort of told a specific story around that. So that made life a little bit easier for us in terms of sort of picking the right ones. But again, we spent a lot of time sort of chatting through and sort of thinking about the values of different things together. So, folks, is there anything else you would want to add to that? Otherwise, we can get into the winners and runners up themselves.
Get into it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look at the pro first, and I'll sort of kick this off, and then we'll sort of have an open conversation about the three that we picked. We'll talk about the runners up first, as to increase the drama and the tension of the moment, because that's what we do.
That's what we're here for.
So let's talk about those first, right? So there were three that really stood out. And again, like I said, sort of on the pro side of things, a lot of apples and oranges here. So we were definitely sort of walking down the line a little bit. The first of the things that we'll talk about it as a runner-up was the notion of the shadow wall, sort of the concept of the shadow wall and what that might become. For you that may not have read it, the shadow wall is essentially a large-scale projection that is sort of making shadows, making sort of the invisible real, such that when participants walk through this physical space in London, the environment comes alive around them. They can start to see sort of their pattern of behavior as well as other patterns of behavior around them. And it's mimicking or sort of remembering a king's walk, sort of the way that sort of crowds would sort of celebrate an individual. And now everyone who walks through that space becomes celebrated as well. Is there anything you guys want to describe with this to bring it to life a little bit more?
I think the thing that really resonated with me is like this was one of those ones that was whimsical in the moment, but also had longevity. Like it will stay in that space. It's, you know, it's an installation for good, and it will change over time depending on how busy the day is or how slow the day is, and people can reflect on that every time they go through it.
Yeah, along the same lines, Sarah, like what attracted me to this was it's not like we haven't seen ideas like this before, but there's a real elegance and pared down approach that they took. And I really think about like the difference between like, you know, one or two people walking through there, maybe in the evening, it'd be very kind of like intimate and poetic, but then, you know, a bunch of people on their way to a soccer game fills it up with like light and brightness and energy, you know, commensurate with like probably the energy that's in the space. It's like there's also kind of a utility there too. You know, it's just like just enough light for the right amount of people, for that amount of people.
Yeah, it was really interesting to think about how it would scale, and then the legacy of it, or sort of the spirit of it coming through over time, I thought was really interesting. And I think, Sarah, to your point, the fact that it's a built-in, like this is not something that's designed to be there and then go away. It's not Pyrrhic. It's not sort of an event that passes, is a really nice way of sort of thinking about how we can bring spaces to life in a different way. So the next one of these that we'll talk about is OpenShift. OpenShift is a way of visualizing essentially programming, and so for development. And we were all struck by how, while there were probably things that we would do graphically with it, the concept behind it was really sound, and it sort of brought something that is hard for many to process to a different way of sort of articulating it, and it makes things a little bit more clear for those of us that are more visual. Aric, I know that this one struck you in particular.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, this seems to be of a piece with like a larger movement that I think is really important, which is like when we're talking about very software mediated world, the accessibility of those complex software systems to more people is really important. And, you know, I'm sure you guys have noticed that like our design tools and our software development tools are really kind of collapsing. You know, we can see that certainly on the front end of things when we think about the presentation layer of an application, but it's not nearly as developed in a similar way when we think about back-end services and the complexity of things that really kind of, you know, we're snapping together different capabilities. If you think about, you know, we can have natural language processing meeting analytics intersecting with like basic compute and storage. Those can be kind of complex environments when you start stacking them on top of each other, and like being able to keep in your mind how data is moving in between all of those things is not at all easy. And there's, you know, stuff that you want to happen in between those scenes. So I thought this was a very timely idea about like how you could really like build these systems, which, you know, are increasingly like the mental model is kind of Legos and building blocks. So seeing that and visualizing that, I thought was great. You know, I think we all agreed that it was a little underwhelming in the sort of the visual presentation of it, but the concept, and it looked like some of the basic interaction patterns seemed pretty sound.
Right. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Eric definitely covers it all. The thing that comes to mind for me is just that idea of like the communication between what engineering does and what design does can often be challenging, and finding ways on both sides to better understand how each other builds or how each other creates. And that tool feels like that can be a bit of that bridge to gaining more understanding.
Absolutely, yeah. It's nice. I mean, in the language that they use in the entry, they talk about how it's designed to be inclusive, and I think that there's something true about that in terms of the sense that it's applying a different way of navigating a familiar system that is more applicable to any number of different people out there as well. So it's fantastic. Which I guess gets us to the winner of this category. ta-da, is the one that we picked is the climate converter. And we thought this was actually really wonderful. I mean, again, to Sara and Aric's point about sort of other things that we've seen, like this is not sort of immersive spaces in museums are not a new thing to some degree, but we thought that this one was relatively unique and did a really great job. I mean, beyond the fact that it's designed to be there, for the longer period of time, we really appreciated the fact that it's considering not just sort of the moment of the experience, but also how that experience kind of carries forward over time between visits to the environment itself. When we think about sort of interaction design and experience design more broadly, a lot of that comes down to sort of the moment of time in which you're experiencing something, but also what leads you into that and what you take away from it as well. And we found this one somewhat unique in all of the objects that were submitted or things that were submitted, in that it handles that, and it also does it in a really poetic, beautiful way. And I know, Sara, you had some thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. You actually mentioned inclusivity on the last one, and this one definitely encompasses that as well. Like I loved in their storytelling how they show it's a kid, it's a tall person, it's someone in a wheelchair. Like they really thought through all the different types of people that might be interacting with this. And then the other piece to it was that idea of, we've seen many installations do this where you do something that then reacts onto the wall. And what I loved about it was it's a commitment that you make, but that commitment isn't just written on the wall. It's an object that you get to watch kind of float away. So it becomes a little bit of a secret. It's still yours, but you're joining the community.
It's really nicely done. Aric, anything you want to add on that?
Not too much. It just looked delightful. It looked like they nailed all the aspects to it. I mean, the animation, the illustration and character design style, and as I said, sort of just the restraint when it comes to the interaction and the thoughtfulness of it. It's just like we said, we've seen lots of attempts at something like this. It's rare that they nail all the elements that you need to make this as profound as this looked.
Yeah, it was a really nice one. And when we went back to our sort of the category of utility and playfulness, this really does sort of, it answers the question of sort of giving away the knowledge or passing along the knowledge and sort of bringing people through. But it also, there's a healthy amount of whimsy and play and wonder in there as well, which was really compelling. With that, that handles the professional winners. Like, should we talk about the students now for a sec?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So the first one we'll talk about is we'll do the same thing. We'll talk about our runners up first, then we'll talk about the lucky winner. The first of the runners up we'll talk about today is Jewel, which is about sort of sustainability through play. It's a set of modular building blocks that a child or their parent can use to educate themselves about essentially how electricity works. So it's everything from generators to things like lights to battery packs that can be reconfigured in different ways to teach basic processes around how energy is activated and how it's stored. What we thought was beyond anything else was really amazing about it. I mean, I found the design of the thing incredibly compelling. It's a technology piece that doesn't look like technology. It looks like something that I would want to play with and sort of like have sitting near me all the time. There were really interesting sort of odes to sound in there and sort of secondary and tertiary sort of forms of feedback loops, as well as a healthy dose of play. And it really goes back to that notion of when we think about this student versus professional categories, the students weren't walking that same line of doubling down on one side of the sort of play versus sort of a very strong utility play, very utility based interaction. So we found it incredibly compelling. Anything you guys want to add?
I loved this one. I mean, I'm sure it hits pretty close to home just with schooling kids right now myself and watching how they interact with things. And we have had the circuit boards around, we've had the little kind of Osmo characters and things like that. And the beauty of these were certainly compelling to me, but then also my love of sustainability and that whole area. I love when you can get something that feels so interactive that the kids aren't even focused on the fact that they're learning at the moment. They're just really engrossed in the play, and the learning just happens.
Right.
You know, it seems like the design challenge of these things is to make them like rich enough without overloading them with, you know, fussy interaction. And this again, you know, I think Nick, you pointed this out, it seems to ride that line very nicely. And they're just beautiful objects as well. Like just as far as like just presentation and rendering of the concept, I mean, just top notch.
Yeah, it's really compelling at like so many different levels. Which brings us to the second of these concepts, also really compelling in a very different way, I guess, in a sense, and that is AI Catcher, which it won my heart immediately through the use of camouflage. But then once I even started to read into it, I realized how smart a solution it was and sort of how compelling it was. This is a concept for essentially tracking wildlife, right? So it's a camera plus a sensor that you can essentially attach to any, you know, an object, and you can now record sort of the incidences of sort of wildlife in an environment. You can track them so that, you know, poaching and things like that can be reduced. We thought it was a really compelling, very simple concept, right? I mean, a lot of things, to Sara, to your point about Joule, sort of it did just enough, but it didn't try and do too much more. Sort of it did what it needed to do very well. This felt like the same kind of a thing. I mean, there's a clear necessary need for it. It's a well-documented and well-considered execution on that problem space, and frankly, it's already becoming relatively real, right? And so it's serving a very necessary need. So we felt very strongly about it. It's a sort of a well thought out, well put together project, and we really liked it. Is there anything else, guys?
Yeah, with this one, what comes to mind is just that using technology for good.
Yeah.
That idea that you can be in that space but not be really in their space. I mean, you're there, you can learn, but you're not being invasive, and that's what really drew me to this one.
Yeah, good one.
I liked it because, like, you know, one, it passes the plausibility test. Like, I believe, you know, like I know that we have small cameras. I know that we have, you know, motion sensors. I know that we have AI that can identify, you know, objects and animals. And so bringing these three things together in this way, plus camo, you know, you can see the legs on it. You know, you can immediately project and see the applications for it. You can imagine like just the awesome data visualizations that you could create around it over time. Like, you know, it's something that's simple that sparks the imagination about where it could go.
Absolutely, that's a really nice one. Which brings us to the winner, which we thought should be Dots, which is just an incredibly compelling both subject matter to be working towards as well as sort of execution on it. So Dots, for those of you of us who haven't looked yet, is essentially an accessibility tool that allows people with disabilities to access sort of what we might consider a mixed reality environment and be able to navigate in that. So for folks who don't have the facility to be able to operate a keyboard, mouse, any number of other tools, this provides a way of navigating, accessing, and working through any number of sort of virtual environments or like. We thought it was incredibly well thought through. I mean, obviously, you know, the design team was working with sort of an advocate for this space who was able to sort of test the objects and sort of systems as they were being built. It's a really interesting sort of way of starting to think about sort of like how we tag, you know, essentially like body parts to be able to sort of manipulate space in different ways. That sort of sidesteps what we know, what we see a lot of in sort of a more able world, where sort of things are being designed by able people for able people. This is starting to sort of to think more broadly around sort of accessibility in that way. So I thought it was a very compelling story, and definitely something that we felt, you know, deserved to win this category. So folks, what do you all think?
Yeah, the thing that I think really struck me about it wasn't just designed for a single body part. Like it was again that like where's the breadth that you can get out of these dots that can accommodate the needs of each individual and not just one particular group.
Yeah, it was really interesting how it took like essentially a basic set of building blocks and was able to extrapolate out any number of essentially like use cases or ways of doing things through that simple set of elements, which was kind of wonderful to see what you can do with less.
Yeah.
It really also struck me as like just another great example of, you know, designers and engineers teaming up with the people that they're designing for and they're creating for, and seeing just how profound the results can be, you know. There's something about that that just always strikes a chord with me, and the fact that this was about a community that really needs these kinds of interventions, like I just thought it was like a wonderful example, also great student example, you know, having that experience of teaming up with someone to design for them. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. Gives you the warm feels to see how far something like that can go when you put all the pieces of a process in place.
Yeah, it's very much inspirational, right? It sort of like lights the fire for all of us, which is fantastic. Really, really good.
We can do this. We can do this. It works.
Still do this. Still do this. It's amazing. Well, awesome. So, folks, that's all of the winners and runners up. So again, congratulations to the folks with Dots and Climate Converter, and everybody else as well. It was phenomenal, and a great opportunity and an honor to be able to sort of take a look at all of this great stuff. And so thank you for that. Thanks, Aric and Sara, for going through this process with me. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
It's fun, right? It's crazy. It's fun. And, and yeah, we'll look forward to the folks being honored, and congratulations.
Congrats.
Congratulations, everybody.
Woo. All right, record is off.
Record is